Hey, Jeff Johnston here with the Living Undeterred podcast. I'm excited to have Jas Rawlinson. There's no G in there. From Queensland. I want to say Brisbane, but I'll hack it up. So how about Australia? That's easier. Queensland, Australia. So tell me, what part of Australia do you reside?
Yeah, so I'm in Brisbane, and as Aussies, we always shorten our words or kind of say them not how they look like they should be said. So I understand why whenever I'm speaking to people in the US in particular, they always say Brisbane. And I'm like, that is actually how it's spelled. It probably should be said like that, but we just say Brisbane, almost like a bin.
Yeah.
Brisbane.
I just know it's a beautiful part of the world that I've always wanted to go to, and maybe someday when my life slows down a little bit, I can make it there.
That would be amazing.
So I'm excited to talk with you. You know, I've had a chance to follow you a little bit on LinkedIn and vice versa, and I'm one of the great things about this podcast for me, and I'm sure you are the same way, that you meet some great people with some very compelling stories. And I always there's that superficial picture of everybody. Like, I got I am living undeterred, and you go to your, profile on LinkedIn and you've got your kind of profile up there. But I always like to find out, how did you get here? Like, why do you do what you do? Now, your profile says domestic violence advocate and speaker. So, I don't have to be a rocket scientist to kind of figure out kind of where that led to be doing what you're doing. So maybe you can start off our show today just by a little background about you and your why, and we'll just see where this ends up.
Yeah, for sure. So what I do today, the work I do today is, as you said, domestic violence advocacy. I work as a resilience speaker, and I also do book coaching as well. And so I have always been fascinated by storytelling ever since I was a kid. I was the kind of kid who would lie on my bed reading books, usually books about horses. That was my thing, like many young girls. But I think, although I was always a very creative person and always really interested in storytelling, for me, books and writing and all those kinds of things, I think they were a bit of an escape as well. And that was because I was living in a home with a perpetrator of domestic violence, which in our house was my dad. So books and writing and all these kinds of things were, I guess, my way of disappearing into something a little bit, and trying to, kind of escape from the fear and the isolation and the loneliness that I felt really from the age of 10 through to 18 were the hardest years with my dad. And, when I share my story, I often say anybody who's in my kind of age bracket, I'm in my late 30s, will know that back in the 1990s and early 2000s, we didn't really have a lot of public discourse about things like mental health and, domestic violence or anything like that. And if you ever did see something about DV, it was always an image of, the battered woman that's cowering in the corner. And that's certainly not who my mother was. She learned about, when she could stand up for herself and when it was safe to do so and when it wasn't. But she was never the woman that was cowering on the floor. And the domestic violence in our home was mostly not physical. Majority of the time it was emotional and mental and financial and all of these kinds of things. And so as a young girl in that kind of period of time, I didn't actually have a name or words for what was going on. And I guess the short of my story is that, for my teenage years, I was a highly suicidal, very anxious, very depressed young woman. And then when I was 18, just after finishing school, my dad actually suicided. And so that just added a whole other level of trauma to what I was experiencing. And that led me into many unhealthy relationships and situations. And that led me to my rock bottom moment, which happened at the age of 20. And life after that, I'd say for the next 10 years was really just about trying to rebuild and work out what I wanted to do. And it wasn't until I was about 30 that I really started to step into the advocacy space and do the work that I do today around domestic violence and suicide prevention and mental health and all of those sorts of things. So, I mean, there's so much more we can dig into if you want to, but that's kind of the snapshot of what I was experiencing and what I went through.
Well, thanks for sharing that. I didn't have my rock bottom moment until age 52. So I'm 57 now. And so I appreciate you sharing that story. I wanted to ask you, when you were 10 or 9 or 8, were you aware that this was a typical house, or did you think most kids grew up in a house this was like normal?
Yeah, that's a really good question.
When did you realize that this was a unique situation to your family and that not all your friends were going through this?
Yeah, well, things with my dad were not too bad sort of in those couple of years before the age of 10, but that's when I really remember that he started to become a lot more aggressive, angry, volatile. But I think probably around the ages of maybe 13, 14, especially 15, I would go to my girlfriends' houses and their dads all seemed so normal and so lovely. And I mean, I guess in hindsight too, and we all know this, nobody's family is perfect. And there are certainly people that I've spoken to from my high school in the years since who've revealed some things that they were going through that I would never have guessed. But, you know, most of my friends, quite a few of them did have really good families. And so it used to really, really pain me and actually cause a lot of anguish for me that I didn't have a dad who was so caring and loving like some of my friends' dads. And so, yeah, certainly as I was in my middle of my teens, I think I was starting to realize my home is not like this, but I still don't really have the words to describe what it is. Like, I'm not even sure if I would have said the words domestic violence back then because I wasn't seeing anybody being beaten or anything like that.
Now, did your curiosity get piqued at certain points of your life about your dad's history? Like why maybe your dad felt this way? And have you done research? I mean, I didn't, I'm sure you're pretty open to talk about this stuff, but was there substance abuse or trauma or abuse in his childhood that probably just followed him as he got into adulthood?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I've had quite a few people actually ask, you know, was there substance abuse there? And, you know, it's a fair enough question to ask, but it's interesting because he was not really a drinker at all. He would have his one or two light beers maybe once a week, and that was it. He was not into drinking, so he was never like the drunk, aggressive person, which I don't know if that makes it any worse or better, but he was such a frightening person to be around. But there was nothing, there was no substances to blame it on. I have learned in more recent years, and especially last year when I was writing my most recent book, which is called The Stories We Carry, and I was writing my actual memoir and my experiences as a teen. So I did spend some time talking with my mum about it and actually learning some things that I wasn't aware of. Because growing up, Dad never really spoke. I knew he didn't have a close relationship with his side of the family. There was like a bit of dysfunction there. And I knew that he'd experienced some trauma growing up because when he was fairly young, his mother was involved in a really serious accident. She was actually getting something out of the back of her car, and another car just came straight up and just sandwiched her between their car and hers.
Oh man!
So she was a quadriplegic.
That's his mom.
That's his mother. Yeah.
Your dad's mom.
So,
okay.
And I didn't really grow up very close to his side of the family, but I do remember that, I didn't really have a connection with his mum because I found it really awkward as a kid and a teen to know how to communicate with her because like she was quadriplegic, she was in a wheelchair, she had issues with speech, and but I think back now about how traumatic that must have been for him, and I think my mum actually told me that I think he may have even found out about it from somebody else or on the news, because, we didn't have mobiles back then. So he didn't even know about it from his own family, I don't think, until a friend told him or it was on the news or something like that. But yeah, he certainly had traumas like that. But last year when I was talking with my mum, we were talking about what was going on for my dad kind of towards the end of his life. And mum had revealed to me that there was a period of time where we stayed in a safe house, my mum, brother and I, for about 9 months. And during that time, mum and dad were going to counselling together while we were in separate houses. And this there was this beautiful Christian man who actually gave my parents essentially free counselling, which was so kind. He was a counsellor, and I think he did it for like $5 a session or something like that for them. And it was one of the first times my dad began to open up a little bit, and he was actually doing a lot better during that time. But towards the end of I think our time in the safe house, there was one session that mum said was really pivotal, where basically the counsellor said to my dad, like, you've got to understand, your anger has nothing to do with your daughter, because I was the one that he mainly took his anger out on, aside from my mum. It was like, your anger has nothing to do with your daughter and nothing to do with your wife. And I'd really like to spend some time talking about what your experiences were growing up and, what your life's been like. And I'd like to talk about your childhood. And apparently it was as if a wall just went up. And my dad was like, no, absolutely not. I am not talking about that.
So something happened.
And we don't know. We can make our own inferences, but nobody knows what it was, whether it was just neglect of some kind or whether it was something really severe. But he refused to talk about it. And after that session, he refused to ever go back. And that was when he began to backslide, and things got really bad for all of us again, and quite dangerous looking back. I mean, I think it's quite lucky that I'm here today, given the way that he was. And, it's really difficult to talk about, because with suicide, often we only hear about, often when somebody takes their life, we hear about how tragic what a tragic loss it is and how much it's impacted those left behind. And for me, it was really difficult, because obviously I'd never wanted my dad to do something like that. I just wanted the abuse to stop. But I also had this overwhelming sense of relief when he was gone. So it was really difficult to talk about all of that. And, looking back, it's like I'm lucky that I'm here. And I guess in some ways, it's really hard to say, but, he ended his life, and he made that decision because he said to my mom, he felt it would be better for all of us if he did that. And in some ways, I've got to say, like, even though it's not something you're supposed to say, I think I might not be here if he hadn't made that decision. Because unfortunately he wasn't going to get help for himself. So that's sort of where everything ended up. But, to answer your question, like, there were definitely things that he must have been through. And I just truly wish that he had felt that it was okay for him to get help, because everybody's stories could have been so different.
We just had a great show. I just got out of the studio. I do my weekly mental health radio hour, and tonight's topic was men's mental health. And we talked a lot about toxic masculinity and the issues that go with being a male in a society where strength wins, and crying and showing your sadness and, taking time off and working on self-care still today is stigmatized for men, and even young men today have a very difficult time showing how they feel. Now, I'm trying to change that, because people that follow me see me cry. I've cried half a dozen times today alone. So I just kind of do it in front of especially when I'm around young men, I'm speaking at a high school, I let myself cry a couple times just to show them that, hey, here's this guy with this I am living undeterred, bulletproof, superhuman guy that seems to be, got his shit together, but here he is up there crying, and we need to crack that door as advocates. You do it in the domestic violence arena, and that permeates all different types of, domestic violence isn't just, like you said, isn't just getting hit or yelled at. There's lots of ways that there can be abuse in a family relationship. And it's not always men towards women either. There are ways, there are situations when it works the other way around. And that would be a stigma in my mind. I can tell you in my case, my wife, the last couple of years of her life, she was not my wife. The alcohol had just completely destroyed her to the point where she became, paranoid and angry. And so I'd have conversations with her and it literally just had to say, I'll call you back. We lived in separate houses the last year. I had to get the environment changed. Yeah. So when our son died, we both were alcoholics, but that kind of set us off the edge. And I drank for about a year and a half, so did my wife, heavily after Seth died. And then I decided to quit. I just had that, epiphany moment where I want to live to be 100 and I'm not going to do it by drinking and being angry. But I couldn't get my wife to see things that way. So, in a way, and it sounds cruel, but you kind of open that door to being honest. So I'll walk in. My wife was suicide by alcohol. That's what it was. She wanted to die and alcohol did it to her. That was her death certificate, and so even though alcohol says on the death certificate, I know in my heart that she just didn't want to live. And that was an easy way for her to kill herself. And it sounds, and you said something, and I know people listening to this are going to say, maybe they won't, I don't really care anymore what people think about me or say about me. I've been through hell and I'm in a good place. But when my wife died, there was a sense of liberation. I mean, she was in a wheelchair. She weighed 86 pounds. She was 46 when she died, but she probably, if people saw her, they probably thought she was 68. She really aged quickly. And I think for her, it was a liberation. She didn't want to fight anymore and wanted to join her son. And I felt a sense of liberation. The way I tell people when I'm private with them, I say, it's like with stage 4 cancer. It's like when someone dies, you're like, God, it sucks they died of ALS or cancer, but they were in pain and they weren't enjoying life. And you know what? It's their life. And it's hard to say, but when she passed away, there was just a sense of relief. And it sounds terrible, but it really was, because the end was so hard. It was so hard. It was just going to see her and just like, man, I just wanted to help and I couldn't. And it was taking a toll on my life and my mental health and my boys.
Because as you said, you want to help this person. And, we want every person out there who feels hopeless to find hope again. And like yourself, to find something that gives them reasons to live and gets them out of bed and gets them excited every day of their life. But for those, our situations are so different, but I totally understand what you mean in terms of within the grief, there's like a sense of relief, or there can be. And you feel like you're not allowed to say that a lot of the time.
Right. So you have this event happen, your dad takes his own life, and then you're 18, you said, right?
Yeah.
And then there's a period of time where you kind of had your ups and downs, and then you got the ship righted. What was the thing that righted that ship? What was your epiphany? Mine was looking in the mirror, realizing that I was 52 and I just wanted to stop drinking. Wow. What was your moment?
Yeah, you know what, Jeff? It was getting to this point where I went, I don't want to go through this anymore. Like, I don't want to experience these things anymore that I'm going through, which was
anger and sadness.
Well, it was being in a situation where at age 20, I was sexually assaulted by someone that I'd known for 18 months, and
wow.
I got to this point where I was like, I never want to feel this again. I never want to feel this fear, every day, a simple thing like going to work. I remember being in the lay-by department. I worked for a retail store, and I was in the lay-by department, and this man came in to, put some things on lay-by, and I just remember feeling so afraid of him, and it didn't make
Hmm.
sense in my
Like a
head.
panic attack
Yeah,
almost.
probably in that moment, because I do remember
Yeah.
that he looked at me after a little while and was like, "Are you okay?" And I was
Yeah.
like, "Oh yeah,
Wow.
yeah. Oh, it's just yeah, it's just a busy day, like just one of those days." Like I tried to say something, but I remember feeling so afraid of him, and I went home and wrote in my diary, and I was like, "I hate
Hmm.
feeling this way. Like I hate feeling like I can't live my life. Like I'm even too afraid to travel anymore. I want to go traveling, and I can't even do it because I'm so afraid someone's going to hurt me." And yeah,
Hmm.
I was living in definitely in flight mode, in trauma response from what I'd been through. I was afraid of seeing that person around town. I was afraid of running into him. I was afraid of other people hurting me. And yeah, I just got to this point where I was like, I'm sick of going out and drinking all the time and putting myself
Hmm.
in risky situations. Like I have to take responsibility for that I'm not responsible for the things
Hmm.
people have done to me, but I am responsible for choosing who I'm hanging out with and choosing what I'm
Yeah.
doing. And
Yep.
if I'm drinking all the
Right.
time, I'm not making my best decisions. So it was this rock bottom moment of, I never want to feel this way again. I never want to be abused again.
Hmm.
And if I do not stop
Hmm.
drinking, partying, being around these kinds of people, I am certain that it's going to happen again, and it's probably going to be worse next time.
Yeah.
And so that was
Hmm.
my moment where I went, okay, I've got to really I've got to try and work this out on my own, because I wasn't going to counseling or anything or seeing a psych.
Right.
So I was like, how do I
Yep.
stop this happening again? Okay, well, who am I hanging out with? How do I feel around these people? Do they listen to me? Some of them do, but
Hmm.
some of them probably not the best people to be hanging around with. And then I was
Hmm.
thinking, what kind of guys am I hanging out with? How do I feel when I'm with them? Do they listen to me? Do they
Yeah.
respect me when I say I don't want to do certain things? And so it was a
Right.
slow process of like beginning to become mindful of certain things, and then trial and error, like
Yeah.
I would tell myself, I'm never going to go, I'm never going to do this again, or I'm never going to be around this kind of person. And then the next week I'm like, going on a date with someone that's really not my type of person. And so,
Sure.
it was hit and miss, but through that process, I ended up meeting a beautiful young man who was actually in my friendship circle for a little while. And, I wrote about this in my book, that I don't know what it was he saw in me, because I was still very traumatized, still not making great decisions, but somehow he saw something in me that I guess he thought he could see who I truly was beneath all of the
Hmm.
trauma and the, kind of reckless decisions. And he was the one that
Hmm.
helped me learn how to trust again. But that said, within
Hmm.
that, I still had to do the work myself. I would go, okay, he
Yeah.
says I can trust him, but does he show me that I can trust him? So it was a
Right.
process of
Right.
like, do his actions match up with his words? And they did. And
Because
yeah,
your trust radar must have been way up. I mean, must have been really difficult to let male or
yeah,
female, anyone into
yeah. I
your life.
had conversation with him early on where he was like, I don't understand why you're like, sort of without going to the situation, he was sort of like, oh, do you think
Yeah.
I'm going to hurt you? Like, I don't understand why you're behaving this way. Why are you putting this wall up? And I was like,
Mm.
because I am afraid that you're going to hurt me. Like, I am afraid that you're going to take advantage of
Hmm.
me, even though you've never done that before. And that was a huge thing, like, basically for him to sit there, listen to me say that. And I'm sure it was a bit hurtful, but he was able to swallow his ego and go, okay, I understand.
Yeah.
And, like, I'm not going to do it, we're
Yeah.
not going to do anything that you're not comfortable with. And yeah, so he was part of the process of helping me learn how to trust again. But it went both ways.
Mm.
I had to start putting the boundaries up myself as well.
Well, that's a beautiful story. I'm happy
Yeah,
for you.
thank you.
Um, yeah, I mean, there's always a light at the end of the tunnel. You know, and someone once said, there is a light at the end of the tunnel. We just want to make sure it's not a train.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, a train light coming the other way. But, I think our stories are very different, but they are very similar. The fact that, and then I look at my boys and they're about the age you were when you went through your dad's death and your incident that happened to you personally. My boys were 13 and 15 when their brother died, but they were 19 and 21 when their mom died. That's a lot for two boys. Yeah. Yep. And then, I was an alcoholic too, so I didn't contribute to anything from that perspective. But the reality is that when you give your talks and you talk to, doesn't matter if it's a young woman or a young boy, and they've had something personally happen to them, that they can see what's the other end of this look like, the other side of the fence. I mean, there's a side of misery and pain and anger and suffering and self-torture and, self-doubt and lack of confidence. And then there's the other side of the fence, which is resiliency and being undeterred and learning, keep learning, take on new things. I mean, at my age, I have to keep learning things because it would be so easy for me to get comfortable and go through my little routine and then plop on my couch and watch 3 hours of Netflix or something and then get up and kind of do it again. But I don't operate very well in those environments. I don't think you do either. And that's one of the beauties of advocacy, is that you're free to kind of create your own ways that you want to help people. What are some of those ways as an advocate that you help people? What are some of the main things that you want to talk about?
In terms of like helping them find that light at the end of the tunnel?
Yeah, like as an advocate, like I know what advocate means to me. There's a difference between, say, an activist, someone who's really in your face. I don't have time.
I've never
to be
used
an
the word
activist
activist because it has very bad connotations for me.
I know. I don't like it either. Yeah. And I think you and I are advocates, but so let's maybe the people that want to follow you and get your book and learn more about you, what are some things that you do in your advocacy?
Yeah. So, I guess probably one of the best places or good story to tell is what got me into all of this was back in around 2017. I was actually taking a long road trip from here in Brisbane to where my mother's property is, the property we grew up on. And I was thinking about, what's the next thing that I want to advocate on? What do I want to help people around? Because at that stage, I had created one of the first domestic violence memorials here in our part of Australia. And I'd done a lot of advocacy around DV, and I was starting to learn about how much domestic violence intersected with mental health issues and suicide prevention and things like that. And it was during this road trip that I started thinking about, obviously, my dad's unprocessed mental health issues and how that impacted him, and
right.
or I should say unhealed mental health issues. And that was what led me to create my first book, which was called Reasons to Live, One More Day Every Day. And that ended up becoming a series of 3 books. And each book goes into 10 different stories of people from around the world who've found their light at the end of the tunnel and found a way to, just like yourself, recreate their life and to reconstruct yourself, their life from the trauma or the pain that they've been through, and find a way to turn that pain into some kind of purpose and find meaning from that. And I think that's been a big part of my advocacy is the books that I've written. So the Reasons to Live series, and then my book, The Stories We Carry, are really about championing this idea and this message that our trauma doesn't have to be a life sentence. And that can actually be really controversial when I say that. Sometimes there are people that are like, no, like I'm broken and I'm going to be broken forever.
Right.
And I'm like, I understand that there are parts of us that may never be fully healed, but we don't have to live as though we're broken and everything, we're a victim of life and we're never going to find joy again, and we can't go for opportunities that we want to go for because we're just broken. I absolutely reject that way of thinking. And I know
I do
you
too.
would as well.
I do too.
And So yeah, like my main forms of advocacy are definitely through my books, because I found that it's really interesting, because a lot of people think when they see advocates that maybe the most effective way to empower people is through speaking and, public speaking and all these sorts of things. And I do that. And that is a really powerful way to impact a lot of people in a short space of time. But what I've found is really powerful about storytelling and writing as a form of advocacy is that you can often create these incredible connections with the reader that you might not be able to do in person. Because when we see somebody and, for example, if I'm standing, on a stage or just talking to a group of people, it's inevitable that there's going to be, probably at least someone in that crowd that's like, I don't like Jas's hair, or I don't like her voice. There's going to be things that we focus on, and they can become distractions. They can become, they can create like a little bit of a block between us and that person.
Yeah.
But when you are reading a book or reading someone's story, if it's well written, I should say, you can really bring that person into your journey with you, and they can feel almost like they're sitting right there with you. And this is something that, I'm very happy that a lot of people have said to me when they've read my books is, I felt like I was right there with you, Jas, or I couldn't stop reading this book. Like I stayed up till 2 a.m. because I couldn't put it down, because I was just in the moment with you. And I think that's what's really beautiful about writing as a form of advocacy, is that sometimes you can create these much deeper bonds and really help people have these profound realizations about their own life that you might not be able to do in person, because that person might be distracted by certain things about you and your voice and your clothing or whatever it is. There's certain judgments or biases that might come in. So I love, using the power of writing in my advocacy. That's really how I help people. And I've said this before, that, everyone has their own gift, their own special, gifts. And I feel that the way that I help people is through my words. And sometimes that is, spoken words, but a lot of the time it's written words. So yeah, my advocacy is really through my books. And I think that's the main way that I help people, and then public speaking as well. And just advocacy and trying to shine a light on this message, as I said, that trauma doesn't have to be a life sentence, and it's okay if you're still dealing with things from your past. It's okay if you're still impacted by certain things, but it doesn't have to stop you from rebuilding a life that you love and that helps you serve yourself and other people.
I like the way you framed it, a gift, because sometimes unfortunate events or chaotic events can release that gift. It can reveal a gift. Like some people didn't know they had a gift for writing until a drunk driver killed their child, and they write a book on drunk driving or something. They figure out they're a good writer. And some people don't know they're a good speaker. They're terrified until their wife dies of breast cancer. Now they're running around the country giving talks on breast cancer awareness. It's like, so sometimes, really beautiful things can come out of the pits of hell, I guess, the abyss, as I call it,
You're absolutely,
when you're
absolutely right. And it reminds me of quite a few people.
Yeah, when you're at the bottom. I do too. Some of the most creative people I know, you talk
people
to
with
them
the most trauma.
You find out their why. Yeah, there's something to say about that. And maybe we as a society could spin this and sell it as trauma. Trauma doesn't have to be bad. I mean, you said something, and I always kind of add on it when I say the same thing, but it's okay to let trauma define you. Just define you positively.
Yeah, I like
We always say, don't let trauma define us. I don't agree with that statement. I perfectly love trauma defining me positively. We just don't want the to define us negatively. So when I speak to kids, I say, it's okay to have trauma define you, and leave it at that. And I kind of just say, but make sure it defines you in a good way. It defines you by writing a book. It defines you by joining a nonprofit board. It defines you by not drinking alcohol.
I love that so much. I've actually never thought of it in that way. So yeah, you've just helped me see that in a different way too. Because we only
I was
hear about, people always say like, you don't have to be defined by
Don't
the
let it
things that
define you.
happen
Don't
to
let it
you.
define you. Yeah,
Mm.
right. I always liked Stoicism in college, and I studied it a little bit in some of the philosophy, the ancient philosophy class. They're a Greek philosophy that's 2,000 or 3,000 years old, and there's a resurgence now. So Ryan Holiday has a book out. There's the Daily Stoics on Twitter, and it's kind of a new renaissance. Sorry, my dogs are going crazy over here. So there's this new resurgence of Stoicism, and really a lot of Stoicism is just how you frame things. And so I like to take situations when someone says, don't let it define you, and think, well, how can I creatively turn it a little bit to maybe focus on the positive side of it? So I want to go back to something you said that caught my attention. My dog he's so mad at me, I'm not letting him out right now.
Is he like spinning in circles or something?
Well, yeah, I hate to get up, but Molly can edit this out. But so you said something about meaning.
He's like, no, I will be in this.
Hold on, I gotta let him out.
All good.
Go. All right, I'm back. Sorry about
okay.
that. I don't have an editing crew. My editor will, hopefully she catches it and pulls that out. But no, you said something about meaning and purpose. And I actually talked about this on my radio show tonight because people interchange those two words and they really are different. Meaning and purpose are different. But we always say, oh, find your meaning and purpose. Meaning to me, I'll see what your thoughts are on this, is more intrinsic. It's more, how are you taking the environment and how are you extracting, how are you interpreting it? You know, what are you attributing to whatever happened to you? That's your meaning. It's kind of a value proposition that you feel internally. Whereas I think purpose is more external. It's more action oriented. It's more, what am I going to do now with this? Something happened to me. I've got a lot of meaning. This means a lot to me. My son passed away, but that means a lot to me. But there's no purpose in that. Purpose is like something I have to do actionable after I kind of figure out what the meaning is. So I've been talking to people about, when you talk about meaning and purpose, really they're two separate things. I don't know if you ever thought of it that way. And I tend to lately focus more on purpose. So I've kind of dropped the meaning thing because meaning's too subjective. You and I could have the same event happen to us.
Yeah.
And we could interpret it completely different. Whereas purpose, that is very individual as well. But purpose is kind of what moves the ball, that gets things going.
Like, what do I feel I'm meant to do with this?
Yeah. Right. Well, because my son died. I understand that. What am I going to do about it? My wife died. I get that. It sucks. What am I going to do about it? And that's the difference between meaning. Their death means a lot to me. Purpose is a podcast, the book I wrote, the app we have coming out in July, the tour I did last summer. That's purpose. That's to me, I think it's action. So what's your thoughts on that? Do you feel kind of the same way or do you have different interpretation?
Oh, what a great question. I've actually never really thought deeply about that before. So that was really, really insightful hearing you talk about that. Because as you were talking about it, I was thinking, I probably see meaning as being the action-oriented thing. Because I was thinking about, you've got to take action to find some sort of meaning. But now that I think about it more deeply, I think when we talk about meaning, I feel like that's more about reflection. Like it's reflecting on the situation and, as you said, what does it mean to you? But the purpose really, you're right, it's the action piece. It's like, what am I going to do with this life event or this experience and the meaning that I feel around that? And you're right as well that meaning can be different for every person. I mean, there are plenty of people out there who've been through sexual assault like me that don't find any positive meaning from that they can use to create
that's a tough one. Yeah.
a better life for anyone else. It's like, this is the worst thing that's ever happened to me. And like, I completely understand and empathize with that. But I think the purpose piece for me is it does require action, but I think again it's also a like, what do I feel on a personal level that I'm meant to
Mm-hmm.
do with this life event that I've experienced and the meaning that I've found within that? How am I going to use that to create some sense of fulfillment for me and also to create fulfillment for others or to serve others? So it's definitely,
Yeah, in service is huge.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
definitely an action oriented thing, but I think, I don't know if I know how to articulate it yet, but I think there's something deeper than just the action, because it's also about finding out what that particular thing can, like how that can help others and how it can, yeah, create a sense of fulfillment and then purpose for you as well.
Well, you learn more about yourself when you have a sense of purpose. And, Mike Tyson once said famously, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. And I like that. It's like I had a plan. I was going to retire. My wife and I buy a Caribbean place. I'm a certified scuba diver. So was she. That was my plan. And then I got punched in the face. I got punched in the face again. So that is so true of a quote. And you did too. Yours was at a younger age. I didn't have anything traumatic in my life until Steph died. That's amazing. That's like hard to think. I grew up.
For me, and now that I'm a parent too, like that is one of the worst traumas I feel like anybody could ever go through.
Well, in the 6 years preceding, we dealt with the addiction and substance abuse and the incarcerations and prison and jail and the lying so the 6 years prior to his death was hell.
Because you'd already lost him in one sense. You'd lost him to addiction, and then you lost him to incarceration. And
yeah. And so what I do, and I try to replay moments, and I get sad. I mean, I was today, just a couple hours ago, I was on my deck reflecting some things, and I got really down quick. But, I'm used to it now, and I don't fight it. My son even came out and said, "Are you okay, Dad?" And I said, "No, I'm not right now. I don't lie to my kids. I don't say, yeah, I'm okay when I'm not." It's like, that's when you miss signals from people. So I want people to tell me the truth. If I ask you, Jas, are you okay? And you're not, I want you to tell me. That's what a friend is for. That's what an advocate's for. And especially that's what your family's for. If you can't tell your family you're not okay, who the hell are you going to tell? A psychiatrist? They don't care about you. They do maybe, but most of them, they want the next patient coming in, and they're all too busy. They're all booked out months. And so obviously for a lot of them, it is a money grab, but for a lot of them, it's not. But anyway, so, I try to look at, what I'm doing with my self-care and how I can extrapolate data from what happened to me in the past and then carry that forward to not only make my life better, but those people around me. It's all about learning, right? I mean, it's all about evolving and adapting and taking what life has given us. Sometimes it's a really horrific event. Sometimes it's a great thing, like winning a lottery or something. It's like life's going to give you things and take things, and how we adapt to that is really what determines our mental wellness.
I think it's about finding what's going to give us as individuals a sense of, purpose while we're here on this earth. Because for some people, some people will say that the meaning of life to them is about, their faith and about, or about religion and things like that. And then I find that if there are people who don't have a sense of faith, then they're like, well, what's my meaning in life? Yeah. And I think for all of us, it's got to be about finding.
Well, I laugh because I'm agnostic, so I don't believe in God, and I don't believe in the afterlife per se. So yeah, I struggle. I'm laughing because I was going to write a book on grieving without God because it's hard. Yeah. I don't have a backup plan. I got to find all my solace and peace internally myself. I don't have a celestial being showing me the way. And maybe there is something showing me the way. I don't know it. And I'm as agnostic. I just am comfortable not knowing. I'm not an atheist. There's a difference. Atheists claim they know. I've my whole life always said, how can somebody know there's a God? In other words, God told that person and not me. Well, I mean, I don't understand it. Why would God not tell all of us? Why would he just handpick people? So I always struggled. I mean, this is like 10, 11, 12 years old. When I went to church a few times, I'm like, why do some of these people been told this secret? And I wasn't told about Santa Claus, you know? That was my mind. And as I grew up and I didn't see any more evidence that my thought was inaccurate. And people I hung out with a lot of them were agnostic and a lot of them were Catholics and Christians. And we seemed to all get along. It didn't really matter what we believed in as long as we were good people, you know?
I think what's really interesting
I interrupted you, but I wanted to jump on that because as an agnostic human, it is hard for me to figure out the meaning behind all this stuff. I'm a moral person, but I struggle with faith the way it's defined by a lot of people. Because I have faith. I have faith in you. I have faith in my kids. I have faith in the car that passes me on the interstate that they aren't drunk. You know, I believe in faith. I don't think that religious people can own that word.
Yeah,
I think we as non-religious people have a right to use it too.
I think that's what connects us, like between those who are, you know, people of faith or people who are religious and those who are either agnostic or atheists. I think the thing that does connect us is that we are, you know, for people who say don't have faith, but they're doing, you know, they're living in their purpose, is that we're all trying to find something that gives us a sense of purpose. And for those of us who are living in our purpose, we're trying to make something better for someone else. And I think
bigger than us, something bigger than us.
We're all looking at a bigger picture, whether for some people that's doing it, you know, via God, or whether it's that they're just doing it to looking at a bigger picture in terms of making life better for somebody else. But I feel like all of us need to have a sense of purpose, something greater than us that we are a part of. And it doesn't have to be standing on a stage or touring the world or writing books or any of that. It can just be like maybe once
hanging out with your dog.
Yeah, like for somebody it might be that once a month they volunteer at a certain service, or maybe it's that they get involved in doing things at their child's school or one of their local schools to help out. You know, but there has to be something. I feel like to truly thrive, we need something that is driving us to look at a bigger picture, like to be part of something that is for the greater good of society or just another individual. I don't know. That's the way I
whether you're agnostic or religious or whatever, you can still surrender yourself to the knowledge of not knowing. There's no shame in saying I don't know. And you know, I got to thinking in college, I used this social experiment with some friends, and it didn't go over very well. But I said, let's imagine that there was no hell or heaven. Then how many people that are religious today would say, well, if there's no hell, and the only reason I was doing things was to avoid punishment, that's not really genuine, authentic altruism. If you're only doing something to avoid jail avoid hell, or in the other way around, if you're only doing something to get rewarded, to be a martyr, you know, whatever, that's not genuine, authentic you. So for me, on either side of the spectrum, I'm like, okay, why can't we just do things right, regardless of what you believe in? Just be a good person. Why does religion have to own morality? And I've always struggled with this. And that's why when my son and my wife died, I went like, man, maybe there is a God. This is my punishment for being agnostic.
Oh, wow.
And then all of a sudden, a Catholic friend of mine would have their child die. And I'm like, well, God didn't seem to favor them, you know, any more than they did me. So I play those games, and I'm 57 now. I'm comfortable in my faith. I am as faithful as any person on the planet. I'm not, maybe not faithful. I have faith. It's just different. Yeah. It's a spiritual faith. It's a connected faith. I look at animals and the trees and the ocean, and I just have this awe of the beauty of nature. That's my faith. And why would that be any less valuable to society than somebody who goes to church 3 days a week?
Yeah, and I really hear you on what you said earlier about you know, being agnostic. You're like, I just haven't seen anything yet that makes me believe
I'm waiting.
gives me absolutism one way or the other. And, I
Mm-hmm.
completely understand that because, and this is something else I wrote about in my book was like the struggle after, I think it was, after I'd been assaulted, like looking at people or friends around me, because I went to a Christian school and, most of,
Okay.
half of my friends were all Christian and at church. And then there was this other circle of friends I had from after school, from work and things like that, none of them were
Mm-hmm.
Christian and they were living very different lives to the Christian friends. And I was sort of in the middle of both of these
Yeah.
worlds, not feeling like I truly belonged to either one. And I remember, really struggling with, how come I've tried to do everything by the book and yet all these bad things have happened to me? And is it my
Yeah,
fault? Did I
exactly.
not believe enough,
Right.
And,
Right.
of course, these days I understand that from seeing, like you said, the people that lose kids to cancer and all kinds of things, I don't think that, there's nothing we're doing as people that is causing us to deserve things to go wrong in our lives, unless I'm talking about
100%.
mass murderers and things like that.
Yeah.
But
I like the way you worded that. You mentioned something. I heard this on a podcast, and I was with a friend of mine that was talking about his. I divulged a few moments in my life, some very recently, where they were very spiritual moments, but I didn't feel any religious pull. Like I didn't see anything from above. And this friend of mine was saying, well, I was in this car accident and 4 people died and I was the only one that lived. And so, that was my moment where my faith in God. And I'm thinking to myself, what about the 3 people in the car that died? Where was they could have been strong.
I think as humans,
Odds are somebody in that car
always trying to find meaning in everything.
Right.
And whatever gives you meaning and gets you through is great. But I see where you're coming from. It's like,
I agree.
But what about?
But it's like, man, I feel like sometimes we just dumb ourselves down and we just take the easy road. And it's like, I remember, and again, I hate to rain on anyone's parade or throw water in anyone's big bonfire, but it's like, it'd be easy for me to look out my window and see a cardinal and say, oh, it's my wife talking to me, or because she loved cardinals, or my mom did too. And it's like, maybe my mom died too. It's like, maybe it's my mom. And I could see the utility in kind of playing that game. But if everybody on the planet saw a cardinal and said the same thing, then all of our loved ones are coming back as birds. And I start playing out the scenarios going, okay, I'm not saying people shouldn't do that, but for me, for Jeff Johnston, I don't play that narrative. I just don't see a bird and see my son. I see my son right here. That's what I see him as. I don't see him as any sign from anything.
I don't think there's any right or wrong in any of that. I mean, I was speaking with, your dear friend as well, Maria Lessie, but we were talking about.
Oh, I love her to death.
We were talking about signs, because she'd been sharing with me about signs that she feels she gets from Rob. And for anyone that's listening, this is her husband who passed away suddenly some years ago. Yeah. But she was talking to me about that, and I said to her, wow, like I don't really remember having any really clear signs around, especially not my dad. And I said, because it's taken me a long time to even get to a place where I have some understanding and empathy and don't hate him, which has only been in the last few years, or the last 2 years probably. But I said, I've never had signs from him or anything. And she just interviewed me on her podcast. And I said, it's so interesting, Marie, because I said, I don't know why, but today I just asked God, I said, if these things happen and Marie's husband can give her signs, I was like, Dad, if you're out there, can you give me a sign and show me? And I specifically
something happened, right?
Specifically said I want to see a picture of the Little Mermaid, because before everything went bad with my dad, one thing that we connected over when I was a really little girl was that I loved the Little Mermaid, and this was a really significant thing in my life, that when I was young and he was doing okay, he'd bought me this Little Mermaid nightie, and I used to wear it all the time, and even when I was 12 I could still fit into it. And I remember during the time that we were in the safe house when I was about 16, he sent me a birthday card, and he didn't know where we were, so I think he'd left it at our house, and I must have gone to our house when he was away, and I got the card, or maybe he gave it to my mum at her workplace or something. But I opened the card, and it was a little mermaid on the card. And as a 16-year-old, I was like, oh, who does he think he is? Like, he's trying to reconnect with that part of us doesn't exist anymore, you know? Like, I was really angry about it. But then last year when I was doing this, I was like, well, this is a random thing. So if you're out there, Dad, I want to see a photo of the Little Mermaid, and it has to be the original Little Mermaid cartoon. It can't be the new Little Mermaid that's being made or anything like that. And it was so random because I remember it was like towards the end, I think it was actually the day after. And I was like, well, I didn't get my sign yesterday. And then I think that night I was thinking about it, and I was like, like I remembered something tweaked in my mind, and I was like, hang on, I remember being on YouTube earlier and I was scrolling, and there was something I saw, and I was like, I can remember who the YouTuber was that posted it, but I can't exactly remember what it was. And this wasn't a YouTuber that I followed. They just came up in my feed and randomly. And I went to their page and like scrolled through some recent videos they'd done. And they'd done a reaction video to The Little Mermaid, the new film, but it was a photograph of the old cartoon. And I was just like,
well, there you go.
That's when I went, I called Marie, and I was like, what the hell, Marie? Like this. Yeah, she was so happy for me, but I was like, okay, that's something that's made me go, right, maybe there is something spiritual out there where our loved ones can communicate with us. And I don't know for sure, but that was a hell of a random occurrence, you know? So.
Oh, I certainly would love it. Yeah. It'd be nice if there was a portal that you could, even at death, you could go to and see all your loved ones. I still kind of always leave that door open, but like I just haven't had the evidence, and I'm a fairly skeptical person. I think I learned
to be able to sit and look at the photograph, as you said, of your son or of your wife, and sit there and reflect and have that time of reflection. I don't think that's any less powerful or beautiful. It's just about,
that's a good point.
And maybe you will get some random sign, but I love hearing when people share signs like that, because I'm like, well, maybe that it is a thing that can happen more. But I just think we have to find comfort in something. Like we have to find a way to connect, you know, with those beautiful memories or that person. And I don't think it matters how it happens.
Yeah, I like that perspective, because you know, whatever you can glean from something that adds utility, adds value to your life, why does it matter? If it's real, if it's not real, if it's accidental, if it's intentional, why does it matter? You know, if you feel better and your people around you get inspired and everybody's winning,
exactly.
Why does it matter? Right? That's why I watch people argue on Twitter and stuff like that. I'm like, why does it matter? Why is it? Even, I don't know, we could get pretty philosophical on some things, but I guess it's a quick hour, Jas. I mean, that's always a sign of a really good show, is when an hour goes by fast. How do people reach you? How do they get your books? Do you have it on Audible? How can people follow you and learn more about what you do?
Yeah, thank you. So, and it has gone quick. You're absolutely right. I can't believe we're at an hour, but if anybody wants to get the Stories We Carry or the Reasons to Live series, you can always get it at jasrawlinson.com/books, or you can find them on Amazon. They're all on Amazon or any of your, you know, favorite online book retailers. I have had some people asking me to do an audiobook of the Stories We Carry, and so I may end up doing that at some point. I haven't done it yet, but definitely Amazon, or else, jasrawlinson.com/books. And and then if anybody's interested in writing their own book, you know, if you're writing a memoir and you want someone to help guide you through the process and help you put your own, you know, life story of turning pain into purpose into a really beautiful book, you can go to jasrawlinson.com/book coaching, and yeah, all my speaking stuff is at, jasrawlinson.com/speaking as well. If you want me to come in and speak to your students or your team or anything like that. So all in the one place, you can find it pretty easily.
Well, you mentioned Marie, and I know she just I don't know what the terminology is, stopped or shut down, or her I can't remember her podcast now, Loving Life After Loss, I think, right? Okay. But there was something on social media where she was, I don't know, maybe I'm saying that incorrectly, but anyway, my point wasn't about that. My point was about, she's a great soul. Yeah, she's a warm heart. We just hit it off great. I think I was on her podcast 2 or 3 times, and she's been on mine, and feel the same connection towards you. So something's on that part of the world, something's working out well. There's some good people over there.
Yeah, she's a pretty special soul.
So yeah, and again, that's been the beauty of this type of format I'm in. But well, listen, I really appreciate it. We're at a hard hour. That's great. An honor to meet you. I plan on putting all your contact information when this does post in probably a couple months. I've got quite a few backlogged. But any last words of wisdom you want to give to anybody who's in the grips of struggling through life?
I think probably coming back to the message I shared earlier, that no matter what you've been through or what things have been done to you, and no matter where you are in your healing journey, I just want you to know that, life can and it does get better. It really does. And that's something that I truly know because I've lived it myself. And I think, as I said before, I never want anyone to feel that you have to be at 100% healing and where nothing ever upsets you or triggers you or anything like that to be thriving in life. You can still experience panic attacks. You can still experience down days or bouts of depression. And it doesn't mean that you are broken beyond repair. And it doesn't mean that there's no hope for you or that you can't go on and live a life of meaning and purpose. It's just about learning to live with those parts of yourself and continue on your healing journey and understand that, these things that you've been through, they may actually be a really beautiful way for you to create positive ripples of impact in somebody else's life. And it's just about looking for how you can create those ripples.
You have to, because the other option is being a victim, and that's Absolutely. Not fun. So I had someone once say, and I'll wrap it up with this. They said, whether you are depressed, anxious, sad, happy, whatever stage you're in, the world is going to go on without you. So you, no matter what you're going through, the world's going to go on. So you might as well enjoy it. Enjoy the ride. You can be as sad as you want. The world doesn't give a shit, and it's going to keep rotating and keep going on. And in 100, 200, 300 years, no one's going to know who I was. Very, very likely chance I'll just drift away like everyone else has in history. And so why not, with that wisdom and knowledge that everything's impermanent, why not make the best that we can with the limited amount of time we have, right?
And also for those like yourself who have written books and the work you do, I hope that lives on, well after you do, and so that people do know about you and your work. But regardless, as you said, the world's going to keep turning. So why don't we just make the best of it while we're here?
Yeah, well, it's been a pleasure speaking with you and a great honor to meet you. And I'm sure our paths will cross.
Yes,
okay?
I hope to have you on my podcast very soon too. So it's been a pleasure.
I'm waiting for the invitation. Just send me a link and I'll sign up. All right, we'll keep living undeterred. Okay, Jess?
You too. Thanks, Jeff.